PragerU made a video about the concept of intersectionality and made some very interesting claims about it. Claims that intersectionality means that the opinions of straight white men don't matter, and that it destroys individuality. They build these claims off of their definition of intersectionality, so let's check that out.
You probably think your opinions matter. You probably think you're an individual with unique experiences, thoughts, and ambitions. Well, I hate to break it to you, but according to current leftist orthodoxy, you're wrong. You see, your opinion only matters relative to your identity, and where that identity ranks on the hierarchy of intersectionality. Intersectionality is a form of identity politics, in which the value of your opinion depends on how many victim groups you belong to. At the bottom of the totem pole is the person everybody loves to hate, the straight white male. And who's at the top? Well, it's very hard to say, because new groups claim victim status all the time. No one can keep track. So, how does this intersectionality thing play out? Something like this. Let's say you're a gay white woman. Your opinion matters, but less than that of a gay black woman. Why? Because while all women are oppressed by the patriarchy, and all gays are oppressed by the heterosexual majority, blacks have a victim status that whites obviously don't. Of course, a gay black woman's victim status is less than that of a black trans woman, who ranks below a black Muslim trans woman, and so on. The more memberships you can claim in oppressed groups, the more aggrieved you are, and the higher you rank.
So according to PragerU or Ben Shapiro, intersectionality is a form of identity politics in which the value of your opinion depends on how many victim groups you belong to, and that the more memberships you can claim in oppressed groups, the more aggrieved you are, the higher you rank, and the more your opinion matters. Now, if that's really the definition of intersectionality, I would gladly say, as a progressive, that is stupid. But where did PragerU get this definition? Who has said this? You know, there's a term for presenting things that you don't like in the most absurd way possible to make them look extremely easy to take down. That's called strawmanning, and that's not what intersectionality means. The thing is, if you can just straight up assert the definition of a word, so can I. But instead of just relying on assertion, I'm going to cite not just the dictionaries, but Kimberlé Crenshaw herself, the feminist scholar who introduced the term to feminist theory. First, all online sources are very consistent on defining intersectionality. They all say that it refers to the interconnected way that race, class, gender, and other descriptors overlap to create unique or overlapping systems of discrimination or disadvantage, from Crenshaw herself.
Many years ago, I began to use the term intersectionality to deal with the fact that many of our social justice problems like racism and sexism are often overlapping, creating multiple levels of social injustice.
Now, does this mean that a black woman's opinion is worth more than a white man's opinion, like PragerU seems to think? No. However, what it does mean is that between a white woman and a black woman, the black woman may experience sexism differently than a white woman. Just lumping the discrimination that the two may face together as just sexism runs the risk of losing the nuance of how racist attitudes combined with sexism to create a unique and possibly worse experience of discrimination. So, if you want to know how a black woman experiences discrimination, the opinion of a black woman may be worth more than a white woman's. If you want to know about the experiences of a black transgender woman, a black transgender woman's opinion may be worth more than a black woman's, and so on and so forth. And, I honestly don't think that this is that controversial. If you want to know about the challenges of flying a plane, you would go with someone who has actually spent time flying planes, rather than someone who hasn't, even if the person who hasn't has spent a lot of time reading about flying. So, even with the cited definition that I provided, you may still be skeptical. You may still think that intersectionality is a divisive hoax perpetrated by cultural Marxists or something. So I'm going to provide a demonstration of how intersectionality works with an example who we have right here, Ben Shapiro. So if you don't already know, Ben Shapiro was one of the most prominent conservatives to adamantly oppose Trump. As you can imagine, lots of conservatives, especially people on the alt-right, were very upset about this, and they lashed out at Ben for doing so. However, they didn't just attack him because of his positions or ideas. No, they also brought in his identity. You see, Ben Shapiro is Jewish, and this made it possible for all sorts of vicious anti-Semitic attacks on him, all because he didn't support Trump, and even worse, he doesn't support the alt-right either. If these people can find any one thing about you that's different, they can pick it out, dismiss your ideas, and you as a person. Notice that in a lot of these attacks, these people specifically attacked Ben for being a Jew, even if it's his ideas that triggered the attacks in the first place. Now, you might be saying, but these people attacking Ben aren't attacking him just because he's Jewish. They're attacking him because he criticized their movement and their favorite candidate. The attacks on his identity are secondary to that. To answer that, let's compare the attacks on Ben to attacks on another conservative figure. Gavin McInnes, back around the time that the Charlottesville marches happened, declined to attend the rally and even disavowed the rally and the alt-right because of the march. Predictably, the alt-right didn't take kindly to this either and proceeded to attack again, but I want you to pay attention to the way that Gavin was attacked compared to how Ben was attacked. The attacks on Gavin included harsh words for sure, but since Gavin isn't actually a cuck or a gay person, these attacks were not attacks on his identity. These attacks were objections to Gavin's words and positions, but did not point out anything about his identity as inferior or objectionable, precisely because in this case, Gavin shared the identity of those who were attacking him, so his attackers had less to go after. Finally, let's compare how these two were treated to the treatment that Abigail Shapiro, Ben Shapiro's sister, got from the alt-right. You see, somehow people online figured out the identity of Ben Shapiro's sister in some YouTube videos where she sung opera-style music and proceeded to attack her for being related to the person who criticized them and their favorite politician. The abuse got so bad that comments on these videos were disabled. Now, I want you to pay particular attention to the things that these people are saying. Notice that not only is Abigail being attacked for being Jewish, she's specifically being attacked for being a Jewish woman. The bigoted abuse that Ben Shapiro got was limited to one aspect of his identity that was different, him being a Jew. The attacks on Abigail were focused on two aspects of her identity, the fact that she's Jewish and a woman. Because she was different from her attackers in one more way, they had one more way to attack. Now, you might say that, well, they're just mean words on the internet. All they have to do is get tough, grow some thicker skin. And while getting tougher is always a good idea, Ben Shapiro himself reacted to this, telling Forward.com in an article written about these attacks, quote, "My sister doesn't deserve this. Enough," unquote. Now, I'm not surprised in the slightest that the guy who's famous for saying, "I don't care about your feelings," is speaking out to protect his sister, because defending people you love, even if it's just from verbal abuse on the internet, is what decent people do. They may just be feelings, but feelings are a lot less abstract when it's someone you care about, isn't it, Ben? Now that we've seen how you're treated as a white man attacking the alt-right versus how you're treated as a Jewish man attacking the alt-right, versus being a Jewish woman related to someone attacking the alt-right, I want you to imagine, just for a moment, what it would have been like if Ben or his sister had also been a part of an ethnic minority, if they had been gay, if they had been transgender, if they had been poor, if they had been disabled, if they had been recent immigrants, if they had some kind of mental deficiency, if they had some sort of body deformity. Just imagine how much more they could have been attacked for, how much more they would have been attacked for, not just for what they think, but also for what they are. As for the advice of toughening up, it's good advice, like I said, but people who belong to multiple oppressed classes, like Jewish women, have to toughen up more than the rest of us. And people who belong to even more oppressed classes have to toughen up a lot more and a lot more often than the rest of us do. And we don't have to feel guilty about that. We don't have to feel bad, but if we want to have compassion for people who are abused in this way, we should recognize that belonging to multiple oppressed classes can intensify the type of abuses that you have to face. And recognizing that fact is all that intersectionality is. Now, I want to move on to what's perhaps the main point of this PragerU video, the contention that intersectionality destroys individuality.
Finally, and most important, intersectionality promotes the biggest hoax of all, that we aren't individuals who are to be judged on the basis of how we act, but are merely members of groups to be judged on the basis of our group identity. In other words, you and I, as individuals with our unique experiences, thoughts, and ambitions, count for nothing. Our racial and sexual identity count for everything.
First of all, the only one who's saying this is you, let's make that clear, and it's also impossible. Even based on your own strawman definition of intersectionality, you said this.
Intersectionality creates a united us versus them paradigm. Righteous victims rising up together to fight the oppressor, those dreaded straight white men.
You said that intersectionality promotes the idea that your thoughts and ambitions count for nothing, while your identity counts for everything. But you also said that intersectionality allows victims to unite together to fight their oppressor, the straight white male. Again, the only person who thinks this is you, but even by this standard, doesn't uniting with other victimized groups to destroy straight white men or whatever count as an ambition? Doesn't thinking that you're an oppressed victim and wanting to unite with other victims count as thoughts? I'm pointing this out to highlight that in this video, PragerU presents experiences, thoughts, and ambitions as qualities on one scale, while racial and sexual identity are on another, separate scale. But I think this is absurd. Don't you see how your background and identity play a huge role in determining the kind of experiences you have early on, and that these experiences go on to shape your thoughts and ambitions? Don't you think that a young man who grew up in an upper-class neighborhood would have grown up with different experiences than a young man who grew up in a poor neighborhood, plagued by violence and drug abuse? Maybe the background of the rich man allowed him to escape the effects of excessive violence and struggle, and this led him to aspire to a stable and happy life in business. Meanwhile, the man who grew up in poverty and violence would have an acute awareness of the injustice in the world, and this would lead him to aspire to be a civil rights lawyer or an educator instead of pursuing some other field that may have paid more. Conversely, maybe another poor man may have had to turn to crime in order to survive, and this led him to lead a violent life, while another rich man was moved by a National Geographic documentary he saw to become a philanthropist and work to try and feed the hungry. Our identities and backgrounds play a huge role in shaping the kinds of experiences that we have early on that go on to form the way we think, which helps us decide what it is we want to achieve in life, forming our ambitions. Why do you think we divide voters by race, education, sex, etc.? Because we recognize that these differences in background affect the way they think about things. So, does intersectionality destroy individuality? No, it would be a lack of intersectionality that destroys individuality. Intersectionality is the recognition that every facet of our identities interacts in complex ways to form the experiences, thoughts, and ambitions that we may have. Ben, are you just a conservative? Are you just a straight man? Are you just a Jewish person? No, all these things intersect to make up who you are. Applying a label to a person is not putting them in a box, it is trying to describe them with words, and intersectionality is the recognition that a person is much more than just a religion, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, economic background, ethnicity, etc., but in fact, a complex and unique combination of influences and experiences. This is an affirmation of individuality, not a negation of it. What really negates individuality is discounting people's backgrounds and only seeing them in terms of what they achieve. Finally, I want to say a bit on the notion that the left hates straight white males.
Intersectionality is a form of identity politics in which the value of your opinion depends on how many victim groups you belong to. At the bottom of the totem pole is the person everybody loves to hate, the straight white male. Intersectionality creates a united us versus them paradigm. Righteous victims rising up together to fight the oppressor, those dreaded straight white men. It's hard to imagine an idea less likely to produce a free and equal America than that. But what do I know? I'm just a straight white male.
So this is a notion that has become a little bit of a meme now with certain people on the right. This idea that the left hates straight white men and diversity is just a code word for anti-white and stuff. I think that a lot of this comes from the idea that social advancements for minorities has to come at the cost of the majority, in the case of America, the straight white male. Look, I know that there are certain people who take the notion of privilege and take it way too far, and many times it does go too far into real hatred, but I don't agree with those people, and that's not nearly everyone who advocates for social justice. I don't judge all conservatives on the basis of what the alt-right does. So why should people on the left be judged for what the most extreme loonies do? Now, I'm a straight male, but I don't feel guilty about that in the slightest. I do have some privileges that come with being a straight male, but it doesn't mean that my life is automatically easy or that I'm given preferential treatment in every circumstance. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that comes up when talking about privilege. You see, when people say white privilege, it doesn't mean that you as a white person have done anything wrong or immoral or that your life is unfairly easy and has no struggles. What it really means is that when it comes to how you're treated by institutions and society at large, for example, with the police, we've seen that white people are more likely to be treated the way you have the right to be treated. And that same humanity is not always afforded to others who do not share your identity. Just compare the way that white mass killers are talked about in the media compared to Islamic mass killers. For white mass killers, you often hear the words troubled or disturbed bandied about, while for Muslim killers, well, I think you know just as well as I do where the media goes with that. Then there's this study, which applied to a variety of jobs with resumes of equal qualifications, but with names like Carrie versus Keisha, Jill versus Latonia, Brad versus Darnell, and Jeffrey versus Jermaine. And guess what? Despite the resumes being equal in qualifications, the white-sounding names got 30 to 50% more callbacks. The employers in this case, based on the names alone, made assumptions about the ethnicity of the applicants, and from there made assumptions about the applicants themselves. These results were consistent even with employers who listed themselves as equal opportunity employers. So in this case, should the hypothetical white applicants feel guilty about this preference? No. And you know what? Even the employers who made assumptions just based on the names shouldn't necessarily feel guilty either. These biases aren't necessarily the result of active malicious racism, but are the result of subconscious, implicit biases that many people may not even be aware of. And this isn't solved by shame, it's solved first of all with awareness. I remember once when I was younger, I was out on a walk at night. Now, this was a very safe neighborhood, but suddenly from across the street, there was a very tall black man who suddenly shouted, "Hey," and started crossing the street to come over to me. At this point, I froze and I became pretty scared, but I had no idea what he wanted from me, and I was half expecting to be mugged. But when he crossed the street, all he did was ask me for directions. After this happened, I spent a little while thinking to myself, why was I so scared? Did I really have a good reason to think he was going to attack me? Would I have been afraid if he wasn't a black man? Or if he was a woman? From then on, I've been more mindful about the judgments that I make about people based on first impressions, and I think it's made me a slightly wiser person. I think we've all had moments like that, whether we realize it or not, when we make unfair assumptions about the abilities and motivations of others based on very superficial characteristics. And the point isn't to flagellate ourselves in an attempt to attain moral purity, it's just to be aware of this tendency that we all have and try to avoid making the same mistakes and treating others unfairly. The truth is, it's not so much that the white applicants in the study I mentioned were being treated better than they deserved to be treated. It's just that the black applicants should have been given the same assumptions that were made about the white applicants, an idea that I think you, Ben Shapiro, would be all on board with. Now, for anyone out there who may be a fan of PragerU and what they do, I know that their videos are easy to understand and have snazzy graphics and all that, but I truly believe that they're a bad source of information and arguments. For an organization that claims to be a university, all of the information they present is extremely one-sided, and you're lucky if it's sourced instead of being pure assertion. A very quick search will show that lots of other people have made very good rebuttal videos to PragerU's content, and if you care about knowing what's true and having an unbiased view of the world, I recommend taking a look at some of them. I'll link some of my favorite ones in the description. Thanks so much for watching all of that. If you liked it, please help me out by liking and subscribing and hitting the bell button as well. As you can see, this is a brand new channel, so any help goes a long way. There are plenty more interesting videos I'm working on, so stay tuned.